Hello everyone, and thanks for joining us for our live webinar, The Ins and Outs of External Sharing in Microsoft 365, with our special guest, Andy Honeycutt. My name is Ivan, and I'm a sales manager here at Syskit. Today, we'll be joined by Andy, as well as my colleague Mattia, who will be showing us a demo of Syskit Point after Andy's presentation. Many of you already know us as a company, but for those who don't, let me briefly introduce you to Syskit. Syskit is a software development company with more than 10 years of experience developing state-of-the-art solutions for SharePoint on-prem documentation and administration, as well as solutions for Microsoft 365 governance and auditing. We currently have 5 products, including our award-winning SP-Docket for SharePoint on-prem documentation, as well as Syskit Point for Microsoft 365 governance and security. And before we start, just a few of the housekeeping rules here. All registrants will receive the recording of the webinar within a few days after Andy's presentation, which is coming up next. We will have a short demo of Syskit Point to show how it can help you with external sharing cause. We will then have a Q&A session with Andy where you can ask any questions you might have. So please use the Q&A function on the right side of your screen to ask your questions throughout the webinar. And now it's my pleasure to introduce you to Andy Honeycutt. Andy is a Microsoft 365 collaboration specialist and Microsoft MVP for Office apps and services. He works primarily with SharePoint, Microsoft 365, and Microsoft Teams, delivering training, consulting, and coaching services. Since 2010, his experience as a Microsoft certified professional helps him develop effective solutions for today's diverse and ever-changing business needs. Additionally, he organizes Charlotte SharePoint and Microsoft 365 Saturday events, and you can also find him speaking at events such as SPFest, the Experts Conference, Comsverse, Teams Nation, and SharePoint Saturdays. And I will now give a warm welcome and turn things over to Andy. Andy, are you ready?
Yes. Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me here today. This is going to be a conversation around the in and outs of external sharing in Microsoft 365. We have a lot of considerations that we need to think about whenever we start working in Office 365, especially when we start sharing information with our colleagues, people that are external to the organization, business partners that we might want to work with, customers that we might be collaborating with, or if like you're a consultant, some of the companies that you might be doing consultant work with. So we wanted to kind of demystify some of the sharing considerations that you're going to run into as you are working in the Microsoft 365 ecosystem. So this webinar is really how do we securely share information with those customers, those partners, and those other entities, but maintain some level of control so that we can stay within compliance and liability of the organization. But additionally, we want to give our end users the freedom and capabilities to be able to collaborate without having a lot of overhead, a lot of rules in place that prevent them from being able to do the job that we're asking them to do. So we're going to talk about how external sharing works. I'm going to go through a number of scenarios about external sharing and really deep dive into those capabilities. From there, we're going to talk about the external sharing settings. We're going to also discuss from an admin perspective some of the things that we can do to control this. And then as we're working through this, I'm going to talk about how teams can continue to collaborate on information, such as a document stored in a SharePoint site, or maybe a file that we've shared with one another through Microsoft Teams. So the first thing that I want to address, and this is something that as IT pros, as admins, we really need to consider is self-service site creation. When we've worked in SharePoint previously, like SharePoint on premises, we might have had a site provisioning process in place where we had forms and rules and a process for users to request a site. And then when they requested the site, we would provision it for them. We would add in the appropriate owners. Maybe we'd even create some SharePoint groups, and that would allow us to grant access to that object and to the content that's there. Well, in Microsoft 365, we need to embrace self-service site creation. Microsoft does this by design. They recommend allowing your users to freely create SharePoint sites and Microsoft Teams and Microsoft 365 groups as needed so that they can scale at the pace of the business and they can create these collaboration tools for themselves without that heavy-handed IT approach. That means they're going to be creating their own SharePoint sites. They might be creating their own Microsoft Teams and their own Microsoft 365 groups. Now we can put policies in place on top of this and have a high level of governance and a light touch approach with this. But when you start working here, you're going to find out very quickly there's approximately 20 places that users can create a SharePoint site. And if you turn it off in one location, they might be able to create it in another location. One primary place that I see often users creating SharePoint sites is actually through Outlook. They go and create a group in Outlook, and that creates a Microsoft 365 group, and there's a SharePoint site on the back end of that. Another very frequent place where we frequently see sites created is Microsoft Teams. Every time you create a team, there's a SharePoint site that's created on the back end of that. So when we talk about sharing, it's going to extend from SharePoint into Microsoft 365 groups, and in turn to those other objects that those groups are connected to, and it can also extend into Microsoft Teams. So you need to have a self-service mindset around this. Policies and compliance are going to help us to maintain this. Users are going to be able to freely create it in many cases. Now, some other things that we need to consider. Office applications have, like Word, Excel, PowerPoint, offer a variety of collaboration tools. For instance, I can create in Office and save as directly to SharePoint or Teams, and even share the file with my colleagues directly from Office. So when we are talking about this, the sharing is going to extend into these Office applications as well. And there's a lot of collaboration tools that are going to fall into place there. We're going to have co-authoring as a capability. We're going to have app mentions as a capability. Comments are going to be built into it, but also things like sensitivity labels, data loss prevention. That's also going to need to be something that's part of our mindset. And then SharePoint does provide shared libraries for collaboration. These are also accessible through OneDrive. Now, when I typically go into OneDrive, it's my stuff, but there's a section called Shared Libraries, and what it should say is SharePoint Libraries, because that's exactly what shared libraries are. They're SharePoint libraries that allow us from OneDrive to quickly access our content in SharePoint and then to be able to continue to work with that content without actually having to leave OneDrive. So there's going to be a mixed approach as to how users are working. We might be in OneDrive, we could be in SharePoint, we could be in Microsoft Teams, we could even be in maybe Outlook and still be able to share and collaborate with one another. So just kind of getting started, when we first start to approach this, I approach it from a SharePoint mindset. And just briefly, quick high-level breakdown of the different types of sites that we're working with. We have team sites or communication sites. These are very similar to the on-premises team sites or the publishing sites that we worked with previously. These particular sites, we're going to set them up using SharePoint groups. So we're going to be using the default SharePoint groups like owners, members, and visitors. We're going to be working with permission levels, and then we're going to be building permissions as associated with those permission levels. And when we start working with adding users here, we're going to be able to add people. We're also going to be able to add maybe a security group or a distribution group that we have out there. So as we work with this permission model is very familiar. This is what we've worked with previously. Now, depending on the organizational settings, we can add guest users to these sites. We can also share information from these sites with those users. So we'll circle back to that in a minute. And one of the consideration that we need to have is the introduction of hub sites. We can create a hub model where sites are connected through navigation and links and branding, and even to a certain extent permissions. We can create a hub model that provides future flexibility to reorganize when we need it, but it also brings in additional considerations. Who has access to the center hub? Who has access to the affiliated sites? Who can connect or associate with a hub, and then the sharing considerations around that. But at the core, the permission model is what we've known: SharePoint groups, permission levels, and then working with people. Now, moving on from there, we have Microsoft Teams. Teams has taken the world by storm. Over the course of the last year or so, Microsoft has grown to 115 million daily active users inside of Microsoft Teams. And behind every team is a SharePoint site. So Teams is a big consideration as well. Now, Teams is technically an extension of Microsoft 365 groups. So when you're working with Microsoft Teams, there's a SharePoint site on the back end of that. There's also some shared tools on the back end of that as well. And as far as like the default permission model goes, in Teams, you're going to work with owners, members, and guests. Owners are going to have control of the team, and then members or guests are going to be able to contribute and work with that content that's inside of there. Well, when you go to the SharePoint side of that on the back end, you're going to have a SharePoint site, and there's going to be the default SharePoint groups there: owners, members, and visitors. And we're going to be able to add people maybe to the SharePoint site, but not grant them access to the team. Now, when we look at the permissions there, you're going to notice, like underneath site owners, there's a Microsoft 365 group nested underneath there. We can still add and remove individual users there, but there's a nested Microsoft 365 group, and that's how they share the permission from Teams to SharePoint and then to the other objects that are there. So it's a consideration that you need to take keep in mind. You might have some people that are just working inside of Teams. You might have some content that's just being surfaced through your SharePoint site, and you're not adding those additional users into those Microsoft 365 groups. And then speaking of your Microsoft 365 groups, when you create one of these, you get a SharePoint site. You get a shared mailbox in Outlook. You get a shared calendar as part of your Exchange. You get a planner, plan for task management. And you have one permission membership that manages all of this. So I can add you to the nested Microsoft 365 owners group as part of the SharePoint owners group, and I can grant you permission to the rest of those objects. But just like Teams, I can add access to some users to just the site and not to the rest of those objects, and I can expose information through there. Now, one thing that's a little bit different about the Microsoft 365 groups is it readily makes available the shared mailbox and the shared calendar, versus Teams, that's actually hidden. There is technically a way a user can get to that by manipulating the URL in the address bar, but for the most part, those objects in Teams, the mailbox and calendar, are actually hidden. But the point of all of this is controlling access to the site through SharePoint groups, through the Microsoft 365 groups and the membership services. Now, extending off of that, we're going to go into sharing and talk about how to share content without necessarily rebuilding our permission model, without going in and creating a whole lot of unique permissions and having to undo a giant ball of yarn when we have a lot of unique and nested permissions. We're going to talk about how we can share and grant access to things directly without having to rebuild those permission models. So just briefly, SharePoint permissions are based off of SharePoint groups, but when you extend into Microsoft 365 groups and even in Teams, you're using the Microsoft 365 group membership in order to do so. Now, members of a SharePoint site, they can visit the site, they can work with the content that's there, but we can always check the permissions of the site by going to the gear icon in the top right-hand corner and then choosing Site Permissions. So when we go there, you're going to see the default groups, owners, members, and visitors. Now, Microsoft recommends that we don't delete those, but we do have the option to add users to those groups. Now, when we do that, it grants them access to the site and everything that's inside of the site. And we don't necessarily want to do that all the time. That's why sharing is going to be a big part of the conversation. But when we share a site, we're allowing them to collaborate in the site and with every object in the site that is inheriting permissions based off of the group that they're going to be a member of. So that grants them access to the site and everything that's there. Well, we're going to talk about admin options in just a few minutes, but when we allow access to a SharePoint site and you're an external entity, there's a few different places in the admin center that we need to make sure the settings or policies are updated so that we can add external users in addition to people that are internal to the organization. So just briefly, with the permissions, we got the share site option, and then as a site owner, depending on the policies the organization's turned on, I'm also going to be able to put some controls in place around how my users within my site are going to be able to share information. So just expanding off of the change how members can share. As a site owner, I can modify the site settings or the site sharing settings within my site independent of maybe the other sites in the organization, provided the organizational admin policies align with this. So for example, by default, users can, as part of the owners or members group, they can share files, they can share folders, or they can possibly share the site. As the site owner, I can lower that permission. I can prevent them from sharing, dropping it down to maybe just owners and members, or maybe just the owners can share content and limit what my members of the site can do perhaps. Now, in this situation, we're not talking about a SharePoint group and adding somebody to that group. We're talking about using the share command, which I'm going to break down in just a second. So the files that you store on a SharePoint site inherit their permissions from the SharePoint site. They use the SharePoint groups, and by extension, the Microsoft 365 groups, to grant access to the site and then everything that shares the permissions inside of that site. Well, when we need to, we could share just a specific file. We could share a folder and all the content that's inside of that folder without having to create unique permissions on content. And depending on the site owner settings and the policies that we add in the admin center, we have control. We can also provide visibility into who that content is shared with, whether it's a file or a folder. We can stop sharing. We can remove links and access to that at any time. We can also change permissions. We can even reset back to kind of the default site permissions if we need. Now, we're talking, as we move forward, not about groups necessarily, but we're talking about the share command and using this as a way to grant access to content in kind of a limited access control. We're not rebuilding groups. We're not using unique permissions here. So when we start working with this, if you're in a SharePoint document library, you can select a file and you're going to see a little arrow pointing to the right, and that's going to be your initial share command. But you also see share up in the command bar as well. This is the option that we're talking about. It's very prominent in SharePoint, but you're also going to find it in OneDrive. So OneDrive, you select a file, you're going to see that arrow to the right pointing up just next to the file name, but you'll also see that in the command bar at the top as well. And that's going to start the sharing experience for that file. You'll also find that sharing extends into Office. So if I open up a document, an Office document, Word, Excel, or PowerPoint, if I open this in the desktop application, or if I open this in the Office Online through my web browser, then I am going to have a share option that actually shows up on the right-hand side of the window. Now, these screenshots are taken from a Mac. It should be very similar if you're working on a Windows device. But I'm going to be able to share directly from the document, and that can save me some time. I can edit the document. I need a colleague to help me out with something. I can click share, and I can bring them in to the document and work with it from there. Sharing is also going to extend when you start working with the OneDrive Sync client. The OneDrive Sync client allows us to take content from our OneDrive for work or school account and synchronize that locally on our local operating system so that we have a copy locally that we can work with offline, and any changes that we make can synchronize back into the cloud. That extends into SharePoint as well. SharePoint uses the OneDrive Sync client to synchronize the contents of a document library offline for that same level of access. It allows us to work with the content, to use files on demand, to make changes offline and have this automatically sync back to the cloud whenever when we've completed our activity. With the OneDrive Sync client, though, you can go into Files Explorer or you can go into your Finder on a Mac, and you can right-click and you can share from there as well. So now share is extended from the web browser onto our desktop via the OneDrive Sync client, and the same share commands that you use in the web browser are going to show up here as well. And coming soon, this is currently rolling out here in March, you're going to be able to use the same sharing experience in Microsoft Teams. Now, it's not here currently, but it is in the process of rolling out. This is the roadmap from this morning that breaks this down. So you got the roadmap ID, the feature ID there. It's 51230. You can search for that and you can see the latest update. But this is currently rolling out, and you're going to be able to go into Microsoft Teams inside of a Files tab, or perhaps inside of a private chat or even a channel conversation, and you're going to be able to use the same sharing experience from Teams. So just continuing forward, when we give you permissions to a site, typically we do that through a SharePoint group or a Microsoft 365 group or through Microsoft Teams permissions. But occasionally we have those external entities that we need to work with, and I don't want to rebuild my permission model just to give them access to that content. So when we use the share command, we're granting them access to just that file or just that folder and the content inside of it. We're not granting them access to the rest of the library, the site, the team, etc. We're just giving them limited access to that one piece of content or the folder that we want to share. And there are a couple of primary link types that we can use here. Anyone with a link anyone in the or people in the organization with the link, specific people, and then people that already have access. And those people with our existing access, they're coming through our group model. So we're going to talk about the different settings that you have here from an end user perspective, and then I'll circle back to what an admin can do in a moment. So let's talk about anyone. Anyone is very literal. It means anyone, internal and external to the organization. So anyone who receives that link can use that link. And if that person forwards that link, then the next person can use it. We can turn this off in the admin center, but this link is anyone internal or external. So whoever gets this link would have access to this file or this folder and the content that's inside of there. Now, breaking that down just a little bit more, this is a transferable link, but we can revoke access to that link. It's transferable because if I forward it to user A can forward it to user B to user C, and so on. So they can freely pass along that link. Now, it's revocable because I can delete it. So even though you have it, I can delete it and then you can't use it anymore. It's secret because you can't guess it. It uses a random generator, and it's unique for each document, and you can't guess or derive from that. And the only way to get this link is to be forwarded that link, but it works internal and external to the organization. So this one frightens a lot of IT admins. Don't worry, we can turn this off. Now, the next type of link we have is people in your organization. This means you have to be part of our Microsoft 365 tenant. You have to have a login or credentials around that. So this particular link will only work for people that are part of the organization. Now, this will not work if we have an external partner or entity. We're going to have to use a different link type to work with those people, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. So with people in the organization, this particular link, it will work for people that are part of my Microsoft 365 tenant. It is transferable, but I can revoke the link if I need to. So unlike the anyone link, it only works internal. You're going to have to authenticate with credentials that are supported by our organization. But it can be passed around within the organization. So I can pass it to org user A, and they can pass it to org user B, and they can pass it on to org user C. But this link can be revoked, so I can remove it. And if you're not signed in and you try to use this link, it will prompt you to sign in. And if you're not a member of the organization, it's not going to work for you. Now, the next one that we have listed here is just people with existing access. This means you already have access to the content. So I'm basically just giving you a link back to something that you already have. So you're a member of the SharePoint group. You're part of the Microsoft 365 group. You're a member of the Microsoft team that has access to it. I'm just giving you a link back to something that you already have. And then your access and your control is controlled through that permissions and membership service. So we just use this when somebody already has access and we want to get back to it quickly. And then lastly, we have specific people. So this is very specific. It's the email addresses that we provide. Only those users are actually going to be able to use this link. So it'll send out a notification to the person that a file is available. They'll click on that link to open the file, and then they'll get an additional notification that verifies through the same email address and mailbox that this is the person that we're actually looking for. And then that will grant them access to that content. If they try to forward this link to someone else, it's not going to work. It's only going to work for the people who have access to the mail account and the inbox that we share it with. So the specific people link, it is non-transferable, and it is something that can be revoked. So I can delete the link and prevent users from using it moving forward. But this particular link works for both people that are internal to the organization and external entities. So this is the link that I would want to use for somebody that does not work with my company. Maybe they're a customer, a partner, or a consultant that we work with. This is the type of link that I would want to use for them. They're external, and I can control the link. They can't transfer it to anyone else, and I can revoke it if I need. So this one, again, applies to those internal and external users, but in both situations, they're going to have to authenticate. If they're internal to the company, they're going to have to log in with the credentials to the Microsoft 365 tenant. If they're external, they're going to have to do the multi-level verification through the email address and mailbox that we sent the link to. All right, so let's just move forward. A Couple of things that apply to the different link types. So choosing the link type is important, but once you choose the link type, then there's different settings that you can apply, such as allowing the user to edit the file, opening the file in review mode, setting an expiration on the file, setting a password on it, and even blocking a download, making it read-only in the web browser. The type of link type that we choose, anyone, people in org, specific people, will determine the options that we have related to the other settings that are there. So with the allow editing, by default, that's unchecked. That means that file is going to be read-only for the user. If we check that box, the user is going to be allowed to edit and work with the file. But don't worry, we have version history, and version history can track changes, so we can revert back to a previous version of the file if need be. So this is one that some organizations will turn on by default. The next option is to open in review mode only. This allows the user to review the document. They can't change the body of the document. However, they can add comments that we can access through the comment feature inside of Microsoft Word. Now, this one is available strictly for Word. I just heard a couple of days ago, as here mid-March 2021, that Excel is soon to be getting track changes, just like Microsoft Word has. So I would imagine that in the future that this is going to roll out for Excel, but currently this only works for Word. But when you open in a review mode, you can review the content that's there, provide comments on it without actually changing the content of the Word document. Expiration date. We as an admin can set a policy in place and have a definite expiration date for the item. But as an end user, I can also set an expiration date in many cases when I share a document so that the link is not there perpetually. Set it, company default at 30 days, maybe I say 2 weeks as an end user. We can set a shorter duration, but as an end user, I cannot set a longer duration that exceeds the organizational policy. And then we can block download. Now this works for Office only documents, but when we turn on this option, users can't download it, they can't print it, they can't copy the file, they can only view it in the web browser, Office Online. They're not going to be able to open it in the desktop, they're not going to be able to open it in any mobile devices. Now, I do want to provide a little bit of clarification. You see share and then you see copy link there. And I get a lot of questions around this from end users. What's the difference? Well, when you share, you're sending an email notification to the user, but Microsoft's drafting that communication for you. You have the option to customize the notification, but for the most part, you're saying, these are the people that I want to have access to this. This is the message. You hit share and it handles the rest of the communication for you. Copy link, on the other hand, it allows you to do the same level of controls, but you have to share and distribute that link to other people, whether you send that in an Outlook email, whether you send it as part of a chat or conversation in Microsoft Teams, send it through text message or some other communication, you have to copy and distribute that link versus share. It does a lot of the communication for you. Now, at any point, if I've shared something, I'm going to be able to review this in a couple of ways. Site owners are going to be able to go to site contents, and then inside of site contents, we're going to be able to view some reporting, and we're going to be able to see things that are shared from there. End users, on the other hand, they're going to be able to go to a document library, select the item, file, or folder, view the information icon, which is the little eye icon up in the corner, and then they're going to be able to choose Manage Access. From Manage Access, we're going to be able to view the links that are giving access for that document. So these are the sharing links. These are the links that are sent out to anyone or people in the org. These are the links that are allowing editing or maybe read-only or blocking downloads. And you can see a document can have multiple links giving access to it. Now, any one of these can be modified. There's an ellipsis there. You can delete the link. You can change the link. You can also add in additional users to be able to use that link from there. On the other side of that equation, though, inside of Manage Access, you have direct access. So if you scroll down in that window, you have direct access. And direct access are people that have permissions to that content. It's not shared with them. They're using a SharePoint group, a permission level, a Microsoft 365 group, or Microsoft Teams to access that content. And that's really the difference between the two. So that's what an end user is going to see. And that share command will show up in a number of different places, as we mentioned, inside of SharePoint, inside of OneDrive, in Office on your desktop, also soon to be Microsoft Teams, and through the OneDrive Sync client. And also there's an extension of it. You'll see some of it in Outlook in the web as well. Now that's what an end user is going to experience. So we need to educate those users on what share actually means and the correct type of link to use. That being said, from the admin center, we can put some controls and policies in place on top of this, and we can limit some of what they're going to be able to do. So let's talk about the admin options that we have. Now, from an administrative standpoint, there's 3 or 4 different levels where we can define controls on top of this, and we have to kind of do it in a certain order in order to set everything up. And I also want to mention, when we talk about sharing, I was mainly talking about sharing from the file or folder perspective. But we can put policies in place that allow us to control sharing on a site basis as well. So like we could allow a site to be shared externally, or we could block sites from being shared externally through the admin center. And by extension, this is going to kind of roll over into Microsoft Teams. So from the admin center, the 4 main levels we're going to be able to work with are Azure AD, our Microsoft 365 groups guest settings. There are SharePoint organizational settings, and that will overlap with OneDrive. And then there are SharePoint site level settings that we can define through policies as well. So the first one is in your Microsoft 365 Admin Center. If you head into your org settings on the left-hand navigation, you select services, you're going to find Microsoft 365 groups. And from there, you're going to be able to determine how guests from outside of your organization can collaborate with your users inside of those Microsoft 365 groups. So we can let our group owners add people from outside of the organization. It's checked by default. We can also let guest group members access group content. That is accessed by default. Now there is an article there, learn more about guest access, provided a link to that in the PowerPoint, but if you're in the admin center, the link's right there inside of the description. So this is one of the first places that I'm going to go. And remember, Microsoft 365 groups also applies to Microsoft Teams. Now the second level is the SharePoint Admin Center. So the SharePoint Admin Center is accessible through the Microsoft 365 Admin Center. We open up the new SharePoint Admin Center, and from there we're going to go into policies, and we're going to look for sharing in our left-hand navigation. And this is going to allow us to start setting up our external sharing, our files and folders and links and other options. But it's going to apply to both SharePoint and to OneDrive. These admin centers are kind of being merged together, and so the settings that I apply to SharePoint could have an impact on how a user shares inside of OneDrive. Provided the link in the PowerPoint for how to manage those share settings. Now I want to break down just a couple of things inside of there. We're going to start with external sharing. So when we apply a setting here, this is org-wide. So this is going to apply to all of the SharePoint sites that we have out there, and by extension, Microsoft Teams. Inside of here, you have your SharePoint settings, and then you have your OneDrive settings as it applies to the share command. So anyone, new and existing guests, and people in the organization. The OneDrive settings, though, are dependent on SharePoint. So OneDrive can be lowered independently of SharePoint, but if SharePoint is lowered, OneDrive is going to automatically be lowered to a more permissive model inside of there. And just to reiterate that, I can lower the OneDrive settings. So I can say, like, if you're a user in OneDrive, I can turn off external sharing from your OneDrive. But if I turn that off inside of SharePoint, it's also going to apply to OneDrive. So I can independently control what you can do in OneDrive versus what you might do inside of a SharePoint site. And this, again, applies to that share button in both SharePoint and OneDrive. So this gives me control. If I want more restrictive in OneDrive and I want a little bit looser control in SharePoint, I can do that. But if I want more permissive controls in SharePoint, it's automatically going to apply that same level to OneDrive. Now, additionally, as an admin, I can limit this by domain. So I can set this up where I have certain domains whitelisted for external entities or users I want to work with. I can also set this up so that only users in specific security groups can share externally. I can make sure that user or guest users sign in with the same account that the sharing invitations are sent, so I can validate that. I can allow guest users to share items that they don't own, or I can turn that off. And I can also have a verification code and then set up a re-authentication mechanism around that. Additionally, inside of the SharePoint Admin Center, I'm going to be able to control the file and link types. So I can set up the default for my users, and I can determine whether it's view or edit only, and then some expiration options on top of that. So if I'm a user in the organization, I might set my default for sharing to be only people in the org. I might turn off anyone with the link completely, and then it would automatically default to people in the org. But I can also set this up to just specific people. That's going to be the default option when you hit the share button. So I can lower that down if I need. And then I can also say, well, when you open the share command, it's going to be edit, or it's going to be view only as the default there. This is where I also set the expiration date on those policies, 30 days, 60 days. A user can set a shorter duration for a shared link, but they can't set anything longer than what I set up inside of here. So this applies to all my sites out there, and it bleeds over into OneDrive. Now the link expiration, we can set that with a maximum number of days allowed, but the user can make that just a little bit shorter. And with the anyone links, we can also limit like what the link type for a file versus a folder. Now, drilling down a little bit further, we can set an org-wide policy, and then we can still maintain a per-site policy. So with the per-site policies, we can still go in and through the SharePoint Admin Center, we can locate sites on the left-hand navigation, select active sites, select the site from the list underneath that, and then go to the information icon. From there, there's a policies for external sharing option. And so on a per-site basis, we can go in and we can have more permissive or more restrictive permissions set up inside of there for those sharing commands, whether it's anyone, new or existing guests, or people within the organization. So it really is a multifaceted approach. You set your Microsoft 365 group policies first, then you set your SharePoint org policies, then you can set a per site policy from there, and you're going to have control over some of that external sharing. This just breaks down the external sharing for anyone versus new and existing guests, and then people in the org. And then also just wanted to kind of give you a call back to what the end user is actually going to see. So as we move through the sharing options, I choose the default link type, the advanced setting link type, and that's what's going to show up in that shared menu for those users. This is on a per site policy basis, but this could also apply globally as well. And this allows me to control that sharing mechanism for those users. So as we kind of wrap up here, just a couple of best practices that Microsoft recommends, but also in practice that I found to be very, very helpful. Rather than sending email attachments, store your content in SharePoint, OneDrive, or Microsoft Teams and share from there. Everyone's going to be working from the same document. Using version history, it's going to track changes for us. The share and copy links can help us to grant limited access to that. We don't have to go and work with unique permissions and deal with those scenarios. And we also minimize the number of duplicate documents that users might run into in their daily business processes. So use those share and copy links. And if you're using Outlook Online, it's going to automatically take a link or an attachment. It's going to ask you if you want to upload that into OneDrive or SharePoint and share it from there and turn it into a shareable link. It's a time saver, so please use that. Generate the most restrictive and secure link types that you need. Don't use anyone if you don't want your document and the link to the document to be passed around. And as an admin, lower the restriction on that or lower the permission on that. If you don't want anyone, turn it off at the org level and then make users pick a specific person. But make sure you train and inform your users on how to do that. Stay away from anonymous links. So those anonymous links are the anyone links that you can pass around. Use restrictive links. That's going to help you to control more of what's actually happening with that content. And then set expiration dates. As an organization, set an expiration date, 30 days. Users can shorten that whenever they share something, but use those expiration dates to your benefit so that you don't have to go and clean up and worry about managing these links long term. You can do this through the SharePoint Admin Center, and then users, as they start sharing this content, can use shorter links if they need. It's going to help them manage the access to this content across the organization. And then set the default link type. Set the default link type for everyone, inform everyone what that default link type does, and then what their options are from there. And if you want to limit things to just specific people within the organization or specific people, then you can, through your policies, you can actually set that. So with that, we're going to turn things over now back to our colleagues at Zyskit. I'm going to stick around. We'll do some Q&A in a minute, but I do thank you for your time. I hope you found this to be helpful. And with that, I'll turn it back over.
Yep. Thank you, Andy, for the great presentation. As a kind reminder for everyone, if you have any questions for Andy, please feel free to submit them using the Q&A function. But before that, I'm just going to run things over to our Zyskit product development lead, Mattia, for a quick demo on how Zyskit Point helps you secure your external sharing. So, Mattia, are you ready?
Yeah, thank you, Ivan, and thank you, Andy, for the excellent presentation. Can you just confirm, do you see my screen?
I can see your screen.
Okay, excellent, great. So for those of you who are new to Zyskit Point, it's a governance tool for Office 365. It will basically give you comprehensive reports on what's happening inside your entire environment. So it basically covers different services like Azure AD, SharePoint Online, OneDrive, Microsoft 365 groups, Microsoft Teams, and pulls all the data in a central place. So basically, you see here, straight to the point, we have limited time, so we'll just try to focus on external sharing, as application does a lot more than that. But unfortunately, we don't have time. First thing that you need to know, it's a web application and you have to log in with your Office 365 account. So this account, Iva Erceg, is basically a global admin which has total control over the tenant. First thing that I want to show you is basically the look and feel of the application. So how does it look? Basically, what you have is you have your main filters at the top. Let me just reset this view. So you have your main filters at the top, you have your data, you have your views, and when you select something, you get recommended actions. Since we want to focus on external sharing, I'll just use one of the views with externally shared sites, which will basically pre-filter only sites which allow external sharing, and you can see that by the sharing setting here. So it basically either allows that the site can have even anonymous links or just external users. And what's pretty cool that in the next version, which is coming out, you actually have an external user account right here. So additional stuff you can do right on this screen. So you notice that we have something that we call tenant light alerts. And those are basically alerts which you can configure for different activities. One of them are external sharing. So if somebody shared a file or folder in external, you can just configure that event and you can select who should be notified if something like that happens. And you can also configure different filters on who actually performed the action or in which IP range. What you can also do this, so this was basically an alert for your entire tenant. But the same thing can apply if you just select a single site or a team or even a group which has a connected site in the background. So you can once again configure alerts, sorry, other sharing settings, the alerts. And here you have even more options which only apply to that site. So once again, you can say notify maybe only the site or team owners if somebody shared a file externally, or you can even be alerted if an external user has just viewed the file or modified the file. So if you turn down this event, you see that you have different event types. Maybe you just want to be notified if an external user is deleting files. So all of that is possible. What is also possible, if the actual resource is a team, then you can also monitor activities related to adding members to a team. And if you configure the filters correctly by saying if the target is external user, basically you can be notified, or the team members can be notified if somebody added a guest user to that team, which can be quite useful because those people, the team owners, are the people which have the most, let's say, operational knowledge if that guest user should actually have access to that resources. So the next thing that I want to show you, if you click on the name, when you're seeing it's underlined, you can basically drill deeper. And here you get a nice overview of not just the security, also the activity. But for now, let's just focus on the security part. And you see that straight away, I have 4 external users on that site. And those could be even guests inside my team, like Andy mentioned, or they can just have access to specific files. You see some of them are here. So some of them actually have access directly to SharePoint, while others have access to the teams. And if I click on those external users, I can right away see who they are. And if I once again select on them, I have 2 options. So I can see to what exactly do they have access inside that site. So in this case, Eva has access to a specific document library, also to some documents. But what I can also see is what actually Eva did. So I can see activities Eva made. So she accessed some files, deleted some files, even actually created the secured links and shared it with other people. So a lot of possibility here. And what's pretty cool that straight from here, you can actually also do actions. So basically on any screen, any report, you can do actions. If we go back here, you also notice that I have the permission straight here. So here also I can do actions. Okay, the next thing that I want to show you is that basically if you just want to focus on teams or groups, you can also use our Microsoft Teams and Groups view. And here, once again, you can just filter on teams. And you also have the column. It's easy to filter just the teams which have guest users. And basically the same things that I showed you at the SharePoint sites part applies here. As time is limited, I'm moving on to the report section. And here we have a lot of reports, but some of them are, let's say, focusing on external sharing. So the first one is externally shared content. So if you want to know down to the file level, show me all the places external users can access on certain sites, you go to this report, you select the sites, and you just run the report. And simply as that, you'll get for the administration site all the documents, all the places where external users, and those are the ones with the tail icon, have access to, and which kind of access, what's the access level. And if I select any of them, I can simply remove it from here. So that access could be either through a SharePoint group, direct access, or via the SharePoint links, the sharing links. So any kind of access, Syskit-Point will see it. The next report I want to show you is the external users. In this case, we are giving you a bigger, let's say, overview where you see all the sites and all the external users on that site. You can even group it either by user or by site to find out, okay, Adele, here are the sites that Adele has access to. And once again, from here, you can either see what she did on those sites or where exactly on which documents does she have access, or simply remove that access. And if you want to filter by different domains, maybe the only problem could be those free domains, and you want to remove those accounts, you could also do that very simply. And the last report from the report section that I wanted to show you is the sharing links, where you can once again simply select your entire tenant and select in the filters, I want to see all anonymous links, either view only or edit. And once again, when you generate the report, you see all the anonymous links. They could be on OneDrive, they could be on Microsoft Teams, they could be on SharePoint sites. And once again, it's pretty easy to remove those links, even in bulk. Okay, so that was all from the perspective of the content. So if you want to start researching from the user perspective, you can go to our main user screen. And once again, here it's pretty easy to filter external users. It's also, let's select Eva. And you see that once again, we have the same options, either to see all the places where Eva has access across your entire tenant, And basically from here, we can also remove that access. But what you can also do is click on Eva, as her name is underlined. And from here, you can simply see all the memberships in all the groups inside your environment, all the teams, and access to all the sites where she has specifically shared files. And you can also see actions Eva did in the last 30 days. From here, you could also block her sign-in or delete her, or even configure alerts when Eva is doing something on the tenant. And everything you see that it's underlined, so which files did Eva viewed, you can simply click on it and you see the files. Okay, and the last thing that I want to show you guys is a nice automation. It's called permission reviews, where basically inside Syskit Point, you can configure different policies. One of them is, for instance, review only external sharing, when you're able to configure a policy saying, every couple of months, I want my group owners to validate, and here I pick the settings. So I want them to validate all the memberships, but only guests in their teams or groups. And I also want them to validate all those individually shared files with external users. And if I have a policy like that set up for a current period, and I'm a team owner, so now notice please that I'm switching to Cork, a different user, which is actually a team owner. And I got a review request in the email, which is being sent automatically. All I have to do is basically click review now. And inside Syskit Point, once I log in with my my Office 365 account, I get my task. You see here that I'm inside task, and my task is to review this site. And since I'm the site owner, I will be familiar with who should be the member of this site. I see some basic information about this site, who are the owners, what's the description, sharing policy, and stuff like that. And once I start the review, basically it has two main steps. The first one is to validate team members. And since the policy says only validate external members, I see here that I have to validate if Eva Erceg, the external account, should still be inside this group. If not, I can remove her right away from here. And the next step is basically to validate not guest accounts, but those accounts which only have access to specific files. And I have two different views for that. You can see that it can be either shown by content, where I see documents and people below those documents, or I can have it grouped by users, where I have my users at the top, then I can expand to see the specific document that user has permissions. And straight from here, I can remove that access. And once you're done, basically, you just have to confirm it, and you know that your environment is safe. So a lot more is coming in the future. We'll even introduce options for automatic expiration of external users, so that will definitely be coming in a month or two. And with that, basically, our time is up, but there are a lot of more features. So if you're interested, please contact us and we'll show you a full demo. Handing it back to you, Ivan.
Thanks, Mattia, for the excellent presentation. So now it's time for the Q&A session with Andy. So please feel free to ask anything using the Q&A function. And Andy, are you ready?
Yes, I am.
Okay, so let me read out the questions for you. So the first one was from Andrew. So is there a way to allow external sharing without enabling it from the global settings?
Is there a way to allow external sharing without enabling it from the global settings? No, yep. we have to control it through the global setting policies. We have to enable it. There's essentially 3 separate areas in the admin center that we have to enable it in order to allow the external sharing to actually work. If you don't turn it on, the anyone option will be grayed out, and it'll default to people within the organization or specific people, and specific people will limit you from being able to share with external entities.
Okay. So the next one was also from Andrew. So using OneDrive, if we drop a file from File Explorer into an email as an attachment, does it essentially share the files, or does it just send a copy of the latest version?
So it depends on the Outlook application that you're using. If you're using Outlook in the web or in the web browser, it's OWA, the Outlook web app. If you're in the web browser and you add a file into Outlook there as an attachment, as part of the upload process, it'll ask you if you want to upload it to your OneDrive, and then if you want to share the link, or if you just want to upload it as an attachment. That's the behavior inside of the web browser. Currently, the desktop doesn't support that yet, but this is something that Microsoft is working on. They've promised that they're working on that. Now, as far as the drag and drop capabilities of that, I'm not 100% on the drag and drop. I do work with the same web browsers, both Microsoft Edge and Google Chrome, and there are some drag and drop capabilities when you work with the Outlook web app. However, I'm on a Mac, so things are a little different for me, so I'm not exactly sure how that's going to work inside of a Windows system. I'd have to fire up my Windows virtual machine and test that out.
Okay. So the next one was from Rick. So can you show how to revoke the sent link as well as turn off the anyone option?
To revoke a symlink, you do that through the document interface. I did have that in one of my slides. You select the document in the list or in the library, and you go to the information icon on the top right hand corner, and then you have manage access. And from there, it'll show you links giving access, and there's a ... You click on that, and that's where you can actually delete that link and prevent that link from being used. And then I apologize. Can you repeat the second part of that question for me?
So as well as turn off the anyone option.
Yeah. So the anyone option, we do that through the admin center. So depending on whether you want to do it on a per site basis or whether you want to do it like SharePoint wide, in the admin center, you had the sliders. And so with the sliders, if you wanted to turn off the anyone option for OneDrive, just lower the slider down. And if you wanted to turn it off for SharePoint and OneDrive, just drop the slider down, and that'll turn off the anyone option from there.
Okay, thank you. And so the next one is from Thomas. Would a blocked download file still grant stealing by copy and paste?
That one's a little tricky. So they're going to be able to view the document inside of the web browser. They're not going to be able to download a full copy of that document. Now, as far as the copy and paste options, they're going to be able to work with their web browser, and there's many different ways that they could inspect the element, they could view the source code, things like that, and they could still get to the text. They could even take a screenshot. Microsoft has talked about putting some controls in place where, like, let's say you have an Office document open in Office Online, and someone tries to take a screenshot, they black out the screen and prevent that. I've seen some demos around that. I just don't know if they've actually rolled that out or not, but I mean, that's not going to stop a user from pulling out a cell phone and taking a copy of the file from the cell phone and then using optical character recognition and converting that into text. There's still going to be workarounds for that, so there's not going to be 100% prevention of them doing something like that. That being said, when you block the download, they cannot download a copy of that specific file from that web interface.
Okay, thank you. So moving on to the next question, we have shared a link to a folder with an external person, giving them edit permissions. For some reason, they don't get the option to sign in with their Microsoft account, but get the code making them an ad hoc user rather than MFA user. So how do I resolve that?
That one's a little tricky. That was one that I might have to actually see in order to be able to walk you through it. But when we send a link to a specific user, especially an external user, and we have like that password policy on it, they get an initial email that gives them the link to the document. And then the second email that they get once they click on that link is actually to verify access for that. And typically it includes like the password to that particular item. That being said, we do have an admin setting that gives us the ability to check a box that says that we have to authenticate that user, which means it's going to send that secondary email to that user to verify that they are using the same email account in order to access that. So I'd have to. That's when I kind of have to see. I'd have to make sure that the settings are set up in both locations in order to verify that it's actually functioning appropriately.
Yeah. And so since we are out of time, just one more question. What's your recommendation for a 10,000 person organization? Do you allow sites to be shareable? Only some sites with trained owners perhaps, and have quarantine sites that allow sharing, but most don't. So assume training is hard to get out of everyone, but everyone wants to share as easily as possible.
Yeah, so with that one, I'm going to have a hybrid approach. I'm going to, in some cases, I'm going to limit the org-wide settings. Maybe I'm going to limit external sharing across the organization, but in certain sites where I know we have trained users in place and we have the level of training that we need, I might open it up on a per site basis for some of those users. What I'm also going to try and do, and this is a little beyond the scope of what we're doing here, is I'm going to make sure I'm working not only with the admin settings for things like external sharing and security, but I'm also going to make sure that I work with the Security and Compliance Center. I'm going to have retention policies in place. I'm going to have data labels and classifications on content, and that's also going to extend my my sharing experience with those other users. So it really is going to be a hybrid approach. That being said, depending on the maturity of the organization, I might take a little lighter admin approach to it. I might allow a little bit more permissive sharing based off of the knowledge of the users. But if I have a novice in user base, if I don't have that experience or that skill level there, I'm going to put the more restrictive admin controls in place and then open it up selectively to the groups that can prove or that have the experience necessary to responsibly share externally. But a hybrid approach is what I would look at for that situation.
Yeah, thank you, Andy. So I would like to say once again, thank you all for joining us for today's webinar, and we'd like to thank our special guest, Andy Honeycutt, for today's insightful presentation. And as mentioned, everyone who's registered for this event will receive a recording of the webinar within a few days. And if you have any questions regarding our solution, Syskit Point, or any of our other products, please reach out to us at sales@syskit.com. And it was a pleasure having you all here. See you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.